Hey all, I got a sweet one for you today, and it's my 20-minute super short summary of how the world works, who's driving what, who the key players are, and what it's all about. So nearly all of your questions will be answered. I'll put a download link so you can grab this short video tutorial, if you will, on how the world operates, and you can share it elsewhere. And just a couple of quick notes. Next Thursday I'm running, I think, my 5th or 6th weight loss masterclass, a 2.5+ hour interactive workshop where we go through all the key tools and tricks for successful weight loss. And as I've delivered these since last January, I'm adding more and more material and follow-up material and content for all attendees. So it truly is, I think, a one-stop shop, and it's unparalleled. Just to give an idea, I send in follow-up after the live session, I send the full HD recording of the session, the transcript also, and a whole bunch of extra materials to help people. So the first 21 days guidelines in full detail, the carbs awareness cheat sheet, vitamins and minerals chapter from our book, a very important area, the link to our book, of course, and some interviews and other excerpts from my other online workshops that are very relevant to weight loss, and my keynote talk on coronary calcification for people who want to make sure they avoid that heart attack. I give my statin cost benefit keynote because that topic often comes up also. And I attach a simple blood test data sheet. And finally, a bunch of resources on hormonal issues that can affect weight loss, particularly around middle age and menopause. So the full live session, all the Q&As, and a whole load of material afterwards, so you can be absolutely assured of being more successful than you may have been in the past. And the second thing is, I've added another show to my upcoming UK tour. So as well as the Attic in Southampton, I'm now going to be doing the fantastic venue in Ledbury. So the Barn in Ledbury, it's a great venue. We packed it out last year, and the link is down below to book in for that, or I think you might be able to pay on the night as well. So that's going to be a super event, Ledbury in Wales. But with that, here's a sweet 20-minute summary of pretty much most of what you need to know. Okay, let's clear a couple of these fascist, communist things up. So Mussolini had the best definition of fascism, and it should rightly be called corporatism, as it's the merger of corporate and government power. And that's what fascism is. It's kind of extremism in the sense that it's totalitarianism and collectivism. He also said this, which is very important. For the fascist, everything is the state and nothing human or spiritual exists, much less has value outside the state. In this sense, fascism is totalitarian. Of course it is. It's a form of totalitarianism. Now, what about communism? Well, Ayn Rand said it very well. Fascism and communism are not two opposites, but two rival gangs fighting over the same territory based on the collectivist principle that man is the rightless slave of the state. So without going into too much detail and keeping this simple, the Nazi thing in Germany in the 30s and through World War II and that other bad guy in Germany, right? It was National Socialism, and it brought together the unions, the industry and the state into a totalitarian system. They called it fascism, but it's totalitarianism. It's always the same. So hopefully that clears that up. So let's see what we've got in the world today. And Mussolini's version is the most important one, that fascism is corporatism, merger of corporate and government power. And this is obviously the closest definition of what we have over the past few years. It's the corporate and governments joining into a merger, and helped along by the WEF and the UN and all the other people. So let's actually have a quick look at the high-level view and the history that shows us where we are today. So really quickly, back in the late 50s, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund put a lot of money together and brought in a lot of big hitters, and they had a prospect for America, the Special Studies Project. And Nelson was kind of leading it up, one of the Rockefeller sons, and Henry Kissinger was brought in, and he was identified as a particularly person who could help run this show for the coming decades. And the Rockefeller brothers themselves, this is their quote, "We cannot escape, yada, 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 shaping a new world order." So they saw it as their duty, and all its dimensions would be spiritual, economic, political, and social. So you can see the sheer magnitude of this endeavor. Their challenge, in their words, to build a new structure which will make possible the fulfillment of Of what? Of the basic purposes of humanity. So I think you can see now where the modern totalitarianism actually came from, right? In any case, I'm going to speed through this. It went on to them forming the Council for Foreign Relations, and they had David Rockefeller as the chair. And that's just a super high level, bring in all the presidents and dignitaries from around the world, and let's all agree we need a globalist system to run everything kind of thing. Very powerful. And then it merged into, identifying global challenges that would enable the new global government. And interestingly, they had health and pandemics and human resources and kind of population being too big and all these global challenges. And they identified climate change with no scientists in the room. Interesting. As an opportunity to help bring in globalism way back in the 50s. These global challenges led to Harvard's International Seminar. And this was a Rockefeller gig, of course, Ford Foundation funding also, Rockefeller Foundation, Kissinger is in there running it. A who's who of powerful people and power politics, all talking about globalism and global challenges and global government. And it turned out afterwards the CIA was actually funding it too. Interesting. This went on to Klaus Schwab, of course, identified like Kissinger was in 1967, and they brought him in and said, hey, this guy we can use. And the European Economic Forum was set up in 1971, and later in the 1980s it would become the World Economic Forum, which we all know and love. So just a quick word on the Management Forum. It became the World Economic Forum, but the initial few people who came in were kind of hand-picked. And Barbara Ward is interesting because she was banging on about sustainable development, and she was an economist actually, and this was her big thing. And the forum would, of course, all be about sustainable development, climate, stakeholder capitalism, all of this stuff. And the partners now, just coming up to the present day for a moment, well, it's the who's who of the biggest of the big, and these are just the primary funding partners of the WEF, but there's myriad more, and if you just go on the website, I just pulled them out here, it's pretty much corporate across the board are funding partners, and that's just the way it is. Board of Trustees, all the top banks are key at the top level, including the Sberbank in Russia, and of course the Bank of International Settlements, the bank of banks, the central bank of the world. So the banks are kind of a huge part of running this beautiful globalist ideal that we're all suffering under the past few years. The trustees 2019, I don't have to read out some of those names, but you get the idea. And a couple of interesting trustees there as well. Larry Fink, of course, and we know he's been pushing out DEI and trans and all this kind of stuff. And Council of Foreign Relations are in there, Trilateral Commission, they're all members. Rubenstein from the Carlyle Group. And remember the Davos Manifesto. The management has to serve society. It must assume the role of a trustee of the material universe for future generations. So you get the idea. A bunch of crazies, but they have a lot of power, clearly. So we'll go on with the story from 1972, the Stockholm Conference, and climate, planet, all this stuff. Only One Earth got a huge amount of coverage, and Barbara Ward there, who set up the WEF and was key in that, well, she came out with this kind of nonsense. And we had Morris Strong, he was a Rockefeller kind of guy from the oil industry, big oil money, and they rocketed him up to become senior in the UN in no time. So that was Morris Strong, and Rockefeller Foundation, Club of Rome, Climate Club of rich guys, all together, all funding, all making this happen. Morris, by the way, was the major mentor of Klaus Schwab, so all in it together. And we have the Club of Rome just mentioned, set up in late 60s into 70, and it was basically a super rich guys climate disaster propaganda club. And they had the world problematique and all this stuff, completely made up. Aurelio Pache set it up, but The Limits to Growth was the book they had. And again, huge coverage, got all the citizens concerned about catastrophe and probably a freezing planet back then. It's a warming planet now, but whatever you're having yourself. And Giovanni Agnelli funded it, and he, of course, good buddies with David Rockefeller, of course, and in Chase Manhattan Bank as well, where I think they were both directors, or David was the head. But it's all about banking and money, and the intention to get a globalized system and a global government. Always. Global management is required for these catastrophic climate things, right? Yeah, right. And here's the book from the Club of Rome, The First Global Revolution. Look a bit communist now, fascist, with the colours and all? Yeah, because it is. In searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. Well, it would fit the bill. So we'll make up some stuff, but the threat of global warming would fit the bill best. Fit our bill. And all these dangers are caused by humans, so ultimately, the real enemy, we are saying now, the real enemy then is humanity itself. See how they did that just there? They said, hey, all you little ant people, you're the enemy. And we need to get all you ants into a nice little ant farm and make sure you don't hurt yourselves. Really going quickly, I went through this here. Davos Manifesto pops out in 73. Again, same bunch of rich guys, overlapping. And then that goes on to the Trilateral Commission and Richard Gardner and the Foreign Affairs magazine, where they have all the globalist stuff is really exploding. So you can see there, November 3rd, the hard road to world order. They're all talking about world order. And there was the World Future Society that Rockefeller was up to his neck in, and a futurist nutter, Warren Wagner. And they're all talking about crisis and opportunities. It's always about problem, reaction, solution. Identify global crises, supposedly, and then say we need a globalized management system solution. Yada, yada, yada. And look at this Turkey, Morris Strong, looking a bit older there. This is him in 1987, I think. Or no, 1972. The UN Environment Protection Boss warns we have 10 years to stop the catastrophe, right? 10 years. Well, 10 years came, another 10 years, another 10 years, another 10 years, another 10 years. Still no catastrophe. Nothing even worth a toss has changed. And another 100 years, bugger all is going to change. We'll just have the weather and it'll shift slowly over time. But the World Economic Forum was renamed from the European Management Forum in 87 because these guys are going seriously global now and they're doing pretty well, in fairness, so they want to expand. Our Common Future in 1987, the World Commission on Environment, right? And there you have the Brundtland Commission, Harlem Brundtland, Morris Strong, and they're all connected in heavily to big oil, the Rockefellers, Trilateral, Club of Rome, yada, yada, yada. It's a big club, and no, we're not in it, sadly. And a sustainable development gig was what it was. And the inclusion of climate change specifically was initiated and funded by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. Go figure. So I'm going to speed ahead. We have the Common Future. It goes to Agenda 21. That's 1992. Horrifying document to read. There was the In Our Hands Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 92, and they basically got 150 countries or so, all the heads of state, to sign up to this crazy stuff. Nonsense. But they all signed up on our behalf, sadly. So I'd say the big boys and the rich boys, they had a good laugh that night, a lot of champagne and caviar, thinking, wow, we got all these leaders to sign up, all the countries and all the ads, to a pile of utter nonsense we put together. Aren't we great? So the Earth Charter Commission followed the course, and that's Nelson Rockefeller, and you've got Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who set up Bilderberg, for God's sake. His daughter, Queen Beatrix, is up to her neck in it. You have Morris, you have Stephen Rockefeller, Nelson's son coming in to take over, and they've got all of the world leaders kind of in their pocket. Great Transition Initiative 2002, more the same. Disasters coming, but we've got the solution to the problem. Blah, blah, blah. You've got the global leaders of the World Economic Forum. They're getting all the leaders together and making sure they indoctrinate them and they get them on board. Started in 93 with Bill Gates and a couple other early adopters. But here you can see over the next 10 or 15 years the kind of people that they've actually got on board. I don't need to read them out. Anyway, 2020 Initiative. Back in 2005, they were doing the 2020 Initiative. And they basically had all of these young global leaders brainstorming, whiteboarding, and creating task forces, basically on the kind of nonsense that we actually got in 2020 in the end. So you can see how this all works, right? It's not rocket science. Global Risk Report 2006, interesting. They're identifying all kinds of global risks, and again, it's the World Economic Forum chaperoning all of this ridiculousness just to get the global government. And they mentioned, of course, a pandemic flu, risk of a pandemic could be really important. And they also noted back in 2006, the threat of misinformation. Oh, yeah. Leading to a breakdown in public trust and the ability of governments. Yada, 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 yada. And they're talking about this misinformation from the citizens leading to spread of fear and amplifying the consequences of a threat. But you see how they're doing what they're accusing you of. They amplified the fear beyond all belief during the so-called pandemic, but they're accusing you and me of doing it. And misinformation. So it's basically opposites day with these guys. And I forget which figure in the past said it, maybe Machiavelli or maybe it was Mussolini or someone. Always accuse your opponent of what you are actually doing yourself. Actually, it could have been Goebbels. But anyway, so we lash on. They have the Global Technological Revolution 2020. And this is big money and big power behind these. These are not trivial. Global Brains Trust, set up by the WEF after the financial crash. They jumped in, saw an opportunity, started pulling together brains. And remember, financial collapse was identified way before as a potential opportunity to take advantage of, as well as pandemics and climate change, right? So this is right on cue. And they set up these councils, 70 global councils, 1,500 so-called experts. And Klaus and the boys in the WEF are pulling all this together on the back of the financial crisis because it's an opportunity. Let's jump in, pile in the money, run off to Dubai or somewhere, and let's start getting it together, the next stages of our BS plan. He was back. He was with this guy back then. They were good buddies, slightly different now. So Kissinger in the New York Times 2009, you get accused of being a conspiracy theorist when you use this term, New World Order. Right? Yeah, but that's the title of his article in the Times, for God's sake, in 2009. And that's all they want. The ultimate challenge to shape the common concern. And they're going on about terrorism and climate and all this kind of stuff that permit no national or regional solution. I.e., you need us to give you the solution. The solution is totalitarianism, clearly. And you had the London Summit and the G20 and all that stuff set up. So now they're expanding out the governance structures across the world and getting it all together. And the Global Shapers community was added in the WEF in 2011. And they have under the age of 30 influencers. And they're brought in, and they've 14,000 of them. 479 hubs in 150 countries. And they're picking the guys with a lot of influence. Young people, internet people, very clever. And you can't get in unless you're brought in by an existing member or you're already a member of WEF, etc. So they're making sure there's no moles get in there. Clever. And Rockefeller Foundation lockstep in 2010. It laid out this scenario you may have heard of, which was an absolute carbon copy of what happened in March 2020 with the lockdowns. They wrote it all out, what would happen in a future pandemic, and they wrote it all in 2010. And this was dog whistling and just letting everyone in the whole organizations know how it needed to be run when the time comes. And when the time comes, you'll tend to know it, because all the media will be bleating like sheep, and suddenly you'll realize, oh, this is the quote pandemic that we all talked about for the last 20 years. Here we are, guys. And they know what they all talked about for the last 20 years, and they know the way it's going to run, right? So they're well trained, like Pavlov's dogs. And I think this is one of the last ones. Public-private partnership, read totalitarianism, read fascism, read pseudo-communism. That's what it is. It's a stakeholder paradigm of international governments, and it is corporate and state joining together, with corporate running the show and the state and the government and the politicians as lapdogs, pretty much. And I remind you how he started: fascism, corporatism. It's the merger of state and corporate power. So now you can see how it ties back to the start of the video, and fascism, communism, totalitarianism. Yeah. So we'll just finish off. This goes on to the UN global goals. Horrifying stuff, really, all couched in lovely, nice, save granny language. And of course, fourth industrial revolution just being laid out, dog whistling from Klaus to all the people involved, what way it's going to go, where it's going to go and what to be doing, what to be saying. And they're going to reshape everything. The physical world, alter the human, integrate the environment with space surveillance and digital technology, yada, yada, yada. All word salad, but basically it is totalitarian control. Clear as crystal. Really big event just before the pandemic kicked off, 2019. The WEF and the UN, who are already part of the structure I've just described to you, Rockefeller, Club of Rome, Trilateral Commission, etc., etc., and the WEF, of course, and UN, they're all together anyway, but they officially joined up in 2019 that the WEF would bring in all the corporate funding partners and fund the UN to achieve the goals, which is the global government and all of these ridiculous goals. And of course, then the censorship went into overdrive because all the media companies are all up to their neck in these organizations, of course. And we have the Common Agenda 2019 looking at 2030. And of course it is climate change, health, pandemics, nonsense pandemics, yada, yada, digital cooperation, that's digital tracking, QR codes, vaccine passports, all that stuff, the gender equality and empowerment of women, that's all the gender nonsense you're seeing the last couple of years. It's not to do with real equality or really caring about women. It's just another thing to confuse and upend society and have everyone not knowing what the hell is going on. It's a great thing to confuse people, this gender bender sex stuff. And education skills, of course, we know for decades now the universities have turned into Marxist kind of hotbeds and nurseries. So education is very important to make the next generation much, much weaker and easier to control than the last. And here we are, global governments, and this is where we are now. There's more coming. I'll deal with that in other videos, but in a nutshell, you've got global governments, you've got the banks at the top and the central banks in a sense, but really you've got the UN, the WEF joined together, and you have the G20 to bring in all the countries specifically. That's the global governments that they're currently reasonably successful at running the world. But then you have the regional level, of course, and then national level, and then local level. And then you've got the individuals. But the politicians we vote for, they're down here somewhere, and they just take their marching orders from the top levels. Like any corporation or any corporate to state or corporate system, the VPs and the top directors basically dictate everything, and then the managers and politicians and low-level employees down the bottom, they pretty much do what they're told or they're in trouble. So, Decade of Action is coming. 24th September 2019, they announced the Decade of Action. And I guess within a few months, we saw some action, right? We saw a, quote, pandemic. Okay, and that unleashed a lot of Pandora's box kind of craziness on us, and we're still seeing it now. But at least now you know what the geopolitical history is, who's doing it, who's running it, what the structures are, and where we are now hopefully totally makes sense to you. And I'm going to finish off with just going back to what we started with. For the fascist or communist or totalitarian, or they're all the same, everything is the state and nothing human or spiritual exists, much less has value outside the state. In this sense, fascism is totalitarian. Of course it is. Communism's the same with a different narrative or bedtime story to cover it about happy, crappy, everyone sharing everything. But at the end of the day, they're all pretty much the same. And we know now who's running the latest rendition of bringing in totalitarianism. Humanity have gone through this for thousands of years. It's always similar. We're just through the current manifestation of this kind of problem. And of course, gotta close with Ayn Rand. Fascism and communism are not two opposites. Of course, they're two rival gangs fighting over the same territory. And it's all based on the collectivist principle, the fairy story they tell us about diversity, equality, inclusion, saving granny, yada, yada, yada. It's always a story, but at the end of the day, the whole goal is that man, the ordinary man and woman, are the rightless slaves of the state or the corporate governmental totalitarian structure. It doesn't matter. So there you are. At least you know now how it all works and why it's all happening. That'll do it, folks. Two things, as I mentioned at the start. One, the weight loss masterclass I'm running next Thursday with all of the additional content I've built over the last few months. It truly is the one-stop shop with the best tools, tricks and tips to achieve successful weight loss and longevity. And the other thing is, of course, I've added Ledbury on June 26th, a Thursday evening, as my other show on my UK tour coming up at the end of June. So the link also down below for that. Thank you.